Look at any photograph of Elvis Presley. Go ahead. Pick one from any year. The young Elvis, 19 and electric, leaning into a microphone like he's about to swallow the world. The older Elvis, in white rhinestone, arms wide open under the lights of a Las Vegas stage. Now look at his eyes, not the smile. Everybody saw the smile. The smile was for the world. Look at his eyes. There is something in them, something steady and present, and just slightly too still, that has bothered people for decades without them quite being able to name it. A quality that photographers noticed, that people who sat across from him in quiet rooms noticed, that his closest friends noticed and never knew how to address. Tonight we name it. Tonight we talk about what Elvis Presley was hiding behind the most famous smile in American history. Elvis Presley learned to smile early. Not the performance smile. That came later, with the stages and the cameras and the screaming crowds. The smile that mattered, the one that became the blueprint for everything that followed, was the one he learned at home, in Tupelo, in the small, close world of Vernon and Gladys Presley, where money was always short and worry was always present. And the easiest thing a sensitive boy could do for his mother was to come through the door looking like everything was going to be fine. Gladys worried constantly. Her whole life was organized around the fear of loss. And why wouldn't it be? She had buried a son on the same day she brought one home. She had grown up poor in the Deep South, in an era when poverty wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. She had watched her family struggle and scrape and make do in ways that left permanent marks on how she saw the world. Elvis saw her carry that weight every single day. And somewhere in the wordless wisdom of a child who loves his parent more than anything, he decided that his job was to lighten it, to come home cheerful, to make her laugh, to be the brightness in the room when everything outside the window felt gray and uncertain. He was good at it, naturally, instinctively, almost effortlessly good at it. The warmth that later made a billion strangers feel personally seen. That warmth was not manufactured. It was practiced. First on his mother, then on the world. But here is the thing about learning to perform happiness for someone you love. You do it long enough. You forget where the performance ends and the real thing begins. You smile through the days when you don't feel like smiling. You swallow the darker feelings because darker feelings don't help anyone. You become, without ever intending to, a person who is extremely good at not showing what's actually happening inside. Elvis Presley was that person by the time he was 10 years old. The smile was real. The warmth was genuine. None of it was fake. But underneath it, from very early on, there was a whole other weather system moving through, and almost nobody in his life ever had the tools to read it. There is a detail about Elvis's childhood that gets mentioned in biographies, and then quickly passed over, as if it's just background information, rather than the key to everything. Elvis knew about Jesse Garon. From a young age, he knew. His parents told him. The way parents in that era and that culture sometimes told their children about death and loss, plainly, without a great deal of emotional processing, as simply a fact of life that had to be acknowledged and then set aside. You had a brother. He didn't live. God's will. But Elvis, being the child who felt everything with that extraordinary sensitivity, did not set it aside. He thought about Jessie, quietly, privately, in the way that children carry things that adults think they've been too young to absorb. He has spoken about it in interviews over the years, always carefully, always with that same quality of stillness in his eyes. He said he felt Jessie's absence as a presence, that there was something alongside him that he couldn't see or name but could always feel, like a shadow without a body, like a conversation that had been going on his whole life in a language he couldn't quite hear. That is not a small thing for a child to carry. Add to it the family's poverty, the genuine grinding move 3 times because you can't pay the rent poverty of his earliest years, and the social exposure that came with it, the secondhand clothes, the feeling of being the kid who was different, who was a little too sensitive, who cried too easily and felt things too loudly and didn't always fit the hard-edged mold that Southern boyhood in that era required. Elvis was bullied, not viciously, not in the dramatic way, but quietly, in the way that sensitive children get mocked for their softness by children who have already learned to hide their own. He retreated into music, into the church, into the private world, where the feelings that didn't belong anywhere else could finally go somewhere. Music was the one place Elvis didn't have to manage himself. Music was the one place the smile wasn't required. And the first time he stood in front of a microphone and opened his mouth, the world heard not just talent, it heard relief. The relief of someone who had found the single outlet in their life where the full truth of what they felt could finally come pouring out. That is why people wept at Elvis concerts. Not because the songs were sad, because something in his voice told the truth. When fame arrived, it solved some things and destroyed others. It solved the money. The poverty that had shadowed every year of his childhood evaporated almost overnight. He bought his mother a house. He bought his father a car. He moved the family to Graceland and surrounded them with the kind of material comfort that Gladys had spent her entire life working toward and never quite reaching. There is something deeply moving about that, about the specific urgency with which Elvis spent his first real money. Not on himself, on her, always on her first. But fame, as it settled in and solidified and became the permanent weather of his existence, also did something else. Something that nobody who was caught up in the excitement of it quite noticed at the time. It made the hiding easier. When you are Elvis Presley, nobody asks how you're really doing. The question doesn't exist in that form. Instead, there are handlers and managers and journalists and fans and hangers on and an entire ecosystem of people whose emotional bandwidth is fully occupied by their own relationship to the phenomenon of you. Nobody sits across the table from the most famous man in America and says, quietly, carefully, with genuine intent, "No, I mean really. How are you?" And if they had, if anyone had managed to ask that question in a way that broke through, what would Elvis have said? He would have smiled. He would have deflected with a joke, a story, that famous self-deprecating humor that journalists always remarked upon. He would have turned the attention outward, back to the person asking, with such genuine interest in them that they would have walked away feeling somehow seen and never once noticed that they'd gotten nothing in return. He was that good at it. He had been practicing since he was old enough to read his mother's face. The people who lived inside Elvis's world, not the fans, not the journalists, not the biographers, but the ones who were actually there in the ordinary hours, they have each, in their own way and their own time, described the same thing. A man who was funny and generous and magnetically warm. A man who could fill any room he walked into with something that felt almost like weather. An atmosphere of aliveness that made everyone around him feel more present in their own skin. And, late at night, a man who went quiet in a way that felt different from rest. Charlie Hodge, who was one of Elvis's closest companions for decades and lived at Graceland for years, once described what it was like to be around Elvis in the small hours. He said that when the house finally got quiet and the day's business was done, Elvis would sometimes become unreachable. Not sad exactly, not visibly distressed, just gone somewhere inside himself. Sitting in a chair or lying on a couch, eyes open, not sleeping, not reading, not watching anything, just existing in some private interior space that nobody else had access to. You didn't ask what he was thinking. You learned eventually not to ask. Linda Thompson, who loved him more honestly than almost anyone, described something similar, a depth in him that she found both remarkable and heartbreaking. She said he was the most emotionally complex person she had ever been close to, that his sadness, when it came, didn't look like sadness on the surface. It looked like stillness. It looked like distance. It looked, to anyone who didn't know him well, like nothing at all. What it actually was, she believed, and what many who knew him have come to believe, was grief that had never been properly processed, loss that had been swallowed so young and so completely that it had become structural. Part of the foundation, not just a feeling on top of it. Jesse Garin, Gladys, the childhood, the poverty, the feeling of being too much and not enough simultaneously, too sensitive for the world he was born into, not equipped enough for the world fame threw him into. All of it lived behind that smile. All of it, every single day, for 42 years. There were moments when the mask came off. Brief, unguarded, mostly unseen by the wider world, but documented by the people who were present when it happened. There is a piece of footage from a concert in the mid-1970s, one of the Las Vegas engagements, where Elvis stops in the middle of a song. Not because he forgot the words, not because of a technical problem. He just stops. And for a few seconds, standing in all that light with thousands of people watching, his face does something that his face almost never did in public. It tells the truth. Just for a moment, just long enough for anyone watching closely to see it. A tiredness that went past physical, a heaviness that the jumpsuit and the lights and the roaring crowd could not cover. And then it was gone. The smile returned. He made a joke. The band came back in. The crowd screamed louder than before. The show went on, because the show always went on. Because stopping was the one thing Elvis had never learned, and the one thing that might have saved him. There is a recording, informal, not intended for release, of Elvis talking to members of his entourage sometime in the final year of his life. Just talking, rambling, really, the way people do when they're tired and the hour is late, and the usual filters have softened a little. And at one point, unprompted, he says something that the people who have heard this recording find almost impossible to listen to without being undone. He says he's tired of being Elvis Presley. Not angry, not bitter, just tired. In the way that a person gets tired of carrying something heavy for a very long time. In the way that even the strongest shoulders eventually need to put the weight down. He said it quietly, matter-of-factly, like he was commenting on the weather. And then someone made a joke, and he laughed, and the conversation moved on. But it sat in the room long after the words were gone. It sits in history now. There is a photograph taken of Elvis Presley in the last year of his life. He is not on stage. He is not in costume. He is sitting in a chair at Graceland, in ordinary clothes, and he is looking directly at the camera with an expression that is very hard to describe, except to say, he looks like himself, not the king, not the icon, just a man. Tired and real and present in his own skin in a way that the performance photographs somehow never quite captured. He is not smiling in this photograph, and he is more recognizably Elvis, more fully, honestly, heartbreakingly Elvis, than in almost any other image ever taken of him. Because the smile, beautiful as it was always a translation, a version of himself rendered into something the world could receive. The raw original. The boy from Tupelo who felt everything, who carried his dead twin and his anxious mother, and the weight of a poverty that left permanent marks, who had been performing okayness since before he knew how to read. That person was always right there, just behind the performance of himself. He needed someone to see it. He needed the world to slow down long enough to let him be something other than electric and charming and larger than life. He needed permission, just once, to say, I am tired. I am sad. I have been pretending to be fine for so long that I have genuinely lost track of the difference. The world never gave him that permission. The world needed the smile too badly. And so Elvis Presley gave it, night after night, city after city, year after year, until he had nothing left to give. He is buried now in the garden at Graceland, next to his mother, under the Tennessee sky he grew up beneath. People come every single day. They stand at the grave and they play his music and they cry for a man they never met. They cry because something in his voice, even now, even through old recordings and worn out speakers, tells the truth in a way that bypasses every defense and goes straight to the part of you that also knows what it's like to smile when you mean something else entirely. That's what he gave us. That's the thing that outlasts the jumpsuits and the movies and the record sales and the mythology. He showed us what it looks like when a person is too big for the world they're given, too feeling, too open, too alive in a way that the ordinary structures of human life were never quite built to hold. He smiled because he loved us, and we loved him back in the enormous, imperfect, insufficient way that audiences love performers. From a distance, through the glass, consuming the light without ever quite asking what it cost to make it. He deserved more than that. He deserved someone who looked at the smile and asked what was behind it. He deserved, more than anything, the ordinary miracle of being truly known. If this reached something in you, share it with someone who understands that the brightest smiles sometimes carry the heaviest weight. Subscribe for more stories told the way they deserve to be told,